Okay, we're going to be talking about the media. First thing let's talk about would be the roles of the media in American politics. For purposes of this course, perhaps the most important role that the media plays in American politics is that of agenda setter. What is meant by this term is that the media decides what issues are important. That is to say, what issues will be addressed by the political system. In this role, the media is not really saying what you should think about a particular issue, but rather they're informing you as to what issues are important, what issues are worthy of your consideration. Sometimes this is expressed as the spotlight function, so the media is shining a light on a particular issue or a particular topic that it believes is important for the political system to address. So again, perhaps for purposes of this course, this is the most important function of the media, the agenda setter role, the ability to decide what issues are important and will be addressed by the political system. A related role, in fact, kind of the reverse of this, is the gatekeeper role. Some political scientists, some analysts will look at the media as also serving as a gatekeeper, deciding, or almost like a filter, deciding that some issues will not be presented. So there's only so much time on TV, there's only so much space in the newspaper, there's only so much space even on a web page that people are actually going to sift through. So somebody has to make a decision. This gets exposure and these things don't get exposure, or they get buried further into the document, further into the newspaper. So in that way, the media acts as a filter or a gatekeeper, deciding what issues make it through to the public. Another role the media plays in American politics is the role of talent scout. And in that role, what the media is doing is identifying potential politicians and then exposing them to the public. This is perhaps accomplished at the national level by the Sunday morning talk shows, the talking head shows, Meet the Press, Face the Nation, and so forth, where up-and-coming individuals will get on TV, talk to pundits and analysts, and then gain perhaps a national following. And while those shows don't necessarily have that big of an audience, it's assured that those individuals who watch those shows are politically active, or at least are definitely voters. So a way to advance yourself politically would be to get onto those shows, get exposure to those individuals. So the media then acts as a talent scout, helping to identify prospective new talent, helping to advance new talent. Another prominent role that the media plays in American politics is that of watchdog. It's expected that in a democratic society, individuals will make decisions about their political system. They will return people to office, they will vote people out of office, they will cast informed votes. If citizens do not have access to information, then this is very difficult. So in a democratic society such as the United States, the media acts as a watchdog, watching over the government, looking for waste, fraud, abuse, corruption, and reporting these things to citizens so that they can take action. It is doubtful that the government would self-report on waste, fraud, abuse, inefficiency, and so on. So having a free press is necessary for the functioning of any democratic system. Again, the watchdog role in American politics is where the media looks at the political system and reports back information to citizens so that those citizens then can make informed decisions with who to vote for or not to vote for. Another role the media plays in American politics is that of scorekeeper. In this role, the media looks at polling data, particularly during campaigns, and announces who's ahead, who's behind, who's moving ahead, who's falling behind, who's topped in the polls, who's leading in certain states, and so on. This practice is referred to as horse race journalism. So when the media is playing the role of scorekeeper, focusing on polls rather than focusing on issues, it is said to be engaging in horse race journalism. While many people find this sort of coverage to be entertaining, informative, particularly those individuals that are concerned with politics or interested in politics, this definitely can be fun and exciting. It is questionable as to whether this type of reporting provides beneficial information to citizens, because horse race journalism focuses on the polls, not necessarily on the issues that the candidates have, the different positions that the candidates advocate. Those are often ignored in horse race journalism. Moving on, we'll talk about the history of the media in the United States. The oldest form of media in the United States would be newspapers. During colonial times and during early American history, newspapers were relatively widely circulated. While not everybody might have been a subscriber, they were pretty well read. People might read a second or third-hand copy of a newspaper. And many towns, many large cities did in fact have multiple newspapers. Even up until the 1920s and 30s, it was not uncommon for large metropolitan areas to have 2 or more newspapers. Oftentimes these newspapers were partisan. They made no bones about it. Some newspapers were directly aligned with a political party, the Democratic or Republican Party, and some simply had a left-leaning or right-leaning tilt. But it's definitely true that many of the newspapers were not unbiased. They were biased and they made no bones about it. An interesting thing about newspapers in terms of how they impact the political system is newspapers tend to provide a lot of in-depth coverage. Even today, where newspapers are said to be in decline, and they probably are, they do provide a lot more information about political events and political figures than you would find on television news. It also should be noted that for the most part, anybody who reads a newspaper is more likely to be a voter than somebody who just does not. Those demographics just line up that way. But definitely newspapers are in decline. Another factor, the next major evolution in American media would be radio. Radio, as you know, began in the 1920s, and by the 1930s it was a staple of entertainment and information across the United States. The advantage of radio relative to newspapers is that it provides relatively instantaneous communication. Another advantage of radio for politicians is that it allows the politician, the political figure, to speak to the American people unfiltered. Prior to radio, if political figures were to try to communicate with the American people, it would only be through the newspaper. A newspaper reporter would be there, they would take snippets, quotes, excerpts, and then they would summarize a lot of the rest and perhaps add commentary to the story as well. Radio allows the political figure to speak directly to the American people without that filter of the news editor or the reporter. The first politician to really recognize the potential of radio is FDR in his fireside chats. He made use of the radio to try to promote his New Deal programs and garner support for his administration. Roosevelt wasn't necessarily the first political figure to use the radio, but he was the one that really began to realize its potential. The next major development in American media history is television. So what is television? Many would say that television is simply radio with pictures, but in reality it's so much more than that. Because human beings tend to rely upon visual information, oftentimes more so than auditory information, perception can be altered by simply receiving these video images. The classic historical event that illustrates this is the Kennedy-Nixon debate. The 1960 presidential election was a contest between JFK and Richard Nixon. So there's going to be a debate between these two individuals. Kennedy shows up, he's well rested, he wears the stage makeup, he seems relaxed and so on. Nixon shows up, he's sick, he didn't shave, he doesn't look that well, he's not well rested, and he doesn't appear as confident as Kennedy does. Now, some surveys were done at the conclusion of the debate, and it was revealed that those individuals who listened to the debate on radio thought that Nixon did a better job than Kennedy did. And the reverse, interestingly enough, was found for those individuals who watched it on TV. So those individuals who watched it on TV thought that Kennedy did a far better job. Now, obviously, it's the only difference between the two is the fact that people were watching Kennedy, not necessarily just listening to him. Now we can argue that there's a problem that there might be a problem in terms of sample selection. People who watch TV might be different than people who listen to the radio and so on. But it is an interesting point of discussion to talk about the impact of that visual image. So television from the 1960s up until about the 1980s, 90s really is the dominant way in which most individuals will get their political information. TV grows exponentially from the early 60s, where hardly anybody has it, to the late 1960s, early 1970s, where the saturation point was probably about 90% of American households. In the 1980s, we really began to see the growth of cable television, such that by the time the late 1990s roll around, approximately 2/3 or more of houses have either cable or satellite television. Now, the impact of cable or satellite TV is it allows for the development of what is called narrowcasting. The business model of traditional TV is to try to appeal to as many people as possible. But cable television makes many of the channels on cable TV make their money by only appealing to a small segment of the population. And we're going to talk a little bit more about narrowcasting in the echo chamber in another slide. The next development in media is going to be the internet. The internet kind of gets going a little bit in the 90s, but after the dot-com bust of the 2000s, we really see, interestingly enough, an exponential growth, coupled together with the not just the internet, but the advent of the smartphone around 2007 or so. So now people have not just the internet, but they have a smartphone, which allows for ready access to the internet. We're not quite sure how the internet's going to affect the political world. There's so many things that are going on, so many new ways in which people are beginning to consume information, and we'll talk about some of those in a later slide. The last thing we need to talk about in terms of media history in the United States is media consolidation. And this is the phenomenon that's going on which has more and more media companies being consolidated into fewer and fewer hands. We go back about 40 or 50 years. There was great diversity in ownership of media outlets, radio, TV, newspapers, and so on. But today we see more and more consolidation in the hands of fewer and fewer companies, and many scholars and observers believe that this might lead to a lack of diversity among opinions. So that's definitely one of the consequences of media consolidation, is a lack of choice on the part of the viewers, and kind of a homogenization of many of the messages, and also some of the echo chamber that we begin to see.